Whoops. So the premise that I'd like to address is that we are working with regenerating the health and viability and flourishing of communities and places through tourism as an instrument for change. And this calls for roles, new roles for us as business owners, as human beings, and a way of being, using that word human being, a way of being that serve living systems. Now, living systems is a term that often confuse people. I know that you heard from Anna Pollock, I believe was it yesterday, and she's talking about very similar things as I am, so I may do some repetition. I want to just define the difference of a living system and if you will, a dead system. And I think that lower picture on the right is a very good picture of a dead system, a monoculture that has no life. It's someplace that I think none of us would want to spend much time. But living systems have complex interrelationships that we have actually ignored and forgotten about, which basically end up with this dead monoculture thinking all over the world. But this talk is about how we actually work with life on its own terms, whether it's nature or human. All of us are nature. So how do we actually work with this complexity in an intelligible way? I think Anna must have had this quote: "The major problems of the world are the result of the difference between the way nature works and the way people think." And that is generally the theme of this talk today. So a couple of points. The ecological crisis will not be fixed with technology and fragmented solutions. The approach of sustainability over the last 40 years has been to reduce the damage, to slow down the damage. And of course, we have from the tourism industry, we have recycling your towels and soaps that are more environmentally friendly. And that is important work, but it is insufficient. There's no such thing as a sustainable building or a sustainable paint or a sustainable light bulb. None of those things will actually transform the way we relate to life, but they will actually slow down the impact, the negative impact that we're having on it, so that we can actually engage life on its own terms and give us the room to maneuver, the time to actually figure out how to re-engage ourselves, regenerate our relationships with life. The other important point is that climate change is not what we should be focusing on. Reducing carbon in the atmosphere does not end up with a sustainable condition. And in fact, to be really accurate about it, carbon is only contributing to 3 to 4% of the problems in the atmosphere. It's the water vapor that emits from bad soil management and bad carbon management in the soil that is actually causing climate change. And this is what monoculture farming does. So we have all these, whether it's plastics in the ocean or habitat destruction or water pollution and social justice, all these issues are a symptom of our lack of coherent ability to address life in terms of its interrelationships, complementary interrelationships, in terms of how life actually supports itself and how each of us can add value to life instead of subtracting from it. So a sustainable condition cannot be obtained unless we learn to turn around our relationship with life. Tourism gives us an opportunity, was one way to gives us one opportunity to do that. So nature knows how to work quite successfully. We see a turnaround in 18 months when we allow nature to do what she wants to do. If we get in the way, we actually never allow and actually stop those processes from happening is when we actually get in trouble. So it's time for us to join it on its own terms. Nature is a continually emerging evolutionary process. And how do we participate with evolution on its own terms is actually what regeneration is about. How do we regenerate our relationship? And that means more than just one time. We have to continually live that way. So I'd like to share a few regenerative principles and then examples to illustrate those principles. And so this dark-faced green type will be the indicator that we're talking about a principle, and I'll sum them up at the end. This is different. This is a different way of thinking, and it is not necessarily easily graspable the first time around. But hopefully we can actually leave this slide presentation with you, and you can actually consult some of these frameworks that will give us a way to actually restructure our way of thinking and working with life on its own terms. So the first one deals with life harmonizes and adapts. It does not concede, it does not lose. So all life can be seen as an activating force and a restraining force or a receiving force. And this is typically as far as we take it in our culture. Our politics, Democrats, Republicans, we talk about heart and mind, science, religion, quantity, quality. We look at the world through duality, an either or situation. And with that, we think that the best that we can do is to concede, to give up. I'll give up a little, if you give up a little, and then we'll call it a day, and we will go merrily on our way. Except that ultimately, maybe 3 years later, we realize, oh, that was a stupid idea. I should not have given up on that, because now look at what's happening. And typically what happens is we're so impulsively, we need to get an answer done or a situation taken care of that we give up just to get ahead. And that is another way of thinking about sustainability, is that we concede something and then we concede it again. So we concede here, we concede again, we concede again, and we drive ourselves into the ground. So conceder is a slower way to die, just like sustainability. If we're just limiting the damage to life, it's just a slower way to die. How do we actually flip that around? And using nature as a model is a one way to think about this, because nature does not concede, it harmonizes, it reconciles. And I want to share with you an example about how that works. But before I go into that, is that nature also works with potential. It always looks forward. If you can actually anthropomorphize nature, nature doesn't, if a hurricane comes through or a fire comes through, nature doesn't sit on its back and say, oh, that was a terrible thing, and waste a couple of years worrying about it and evaluating what to do. It just gets to work and begins to have pioneering species and early succession species and mid-level succession species moving up and creating a more dynamic and interdependent and health creating environment. It is always looking forward. It does not look back at the past. We call that looking at existence. And I call that like driving a car by looking in the rear view mirror. Where does that get you? If we're continually looking backwards and trying to make excuses or trying to engage with focus groups or surveys or what's been done in the past, did that really work? We don't get anywhere. We just keep repeating the same old things. Now, I'm obviously making a point just to make a point, but looking ahead as to terms of what is possible. What does this place, what does nature want to be? Who do we want to be as a people? Actually is a more compelling way of working. So that's probably a little unintelligible. Let me give you an example. So this is a project. This is a 19-hectare oil tank farm in Viña del Mar, Chile. And we were asked to address, a developer heard us talk about this. And he said, if you can harmonize instead of concede, you're worth 25 years of lawyers. Because we are building 1.5 or 1.5 million square foot, I guess that's 150,000 square meter mixed use development. And we have 25 activist groups who are fighting us and literally call us the enemy. And if we can harmonize with them, that will be worth a lot of time and exasperation. So the community is very much against developers because Viña del Mar is one of the great tourist destinations of southern South America. And it is a dying city. You drive into that city in 5 minutes, and you know that it is struggling. So the community blames developers for building these big buildings, for destroying the fabric of the city that actually looked like this. And it still does in a few places, but they borrowed the English garden city tradition in the late 1800s, and it became truly a vineyard of the sea, Viña del Mar. And so now, though, they have forgotten that spirit that created it, and it looks like this. No street trees, a dead zone in the Valparaiso Bay. The estuary, which is this line right there, if you can see my cursor, has been literally made into a parking lot, and the architectural fabric has been destroyed. So it truly is dying. The spirit is dying. So when we work, here's the site. We work on the potential of the city to be healthy again. And there's no reason why this can't be recovered. None at all, except the inability of people, or the ability of people, to work together with common vision. So what we are doing in the city is helping people to see the potential of bringing back the habitat connectivity, the potential of bringing back the health of the estuary, which is the source of the fish for the health of the Valparaiso Bay, the food industry, or the farmers, the farm to table work into the farming region, the vineyards, all bringing back that as an integrated whole system, motivating people to begin to think in a coherent way about recovering that which they've lost. So we met with, and basically what's happening in Viña del Mar is tourism overkill. I'm sure you can relate a bit to this. It's the goose that laid the golden egg. And basically many of tourist towns don't know how to actually balance and restrain the overselling, if you will, the beauty of the place, because therefore then it's now lost not only to the tourists, but it's lost to the inhabitants, the residents who actually value that quality of life. So how do we get back to that? So one of the things that we looked at is the history of and the patterns of life of this place as a living organism, because communities are no different than a human being. They have unique identity, unique potential, unique characteristics. And so the way we actually tell and understand a human being is by looking at their patterns, what the relationships of our, if I want to actually date somebody, I basically look at how he or she is in relationship to me and relationship to others. That tells me much more about that human being than looking at the health of their liver or their kidney or their skeletal structure. Those units of measurement that we typically look at when we look at cities: mobility, habitat connectivity, climate change, gender equity, social justice. Those are pieces of a living organism. And just like I would not be able to tell much about somebody I wanted to get to know by looking at their liver or kidneys, I also cannot tell much about a city without looking at the patterns of their life. So the patterns tell me more about this place than any one aspect. So the Aconcagua Indians, the Inca Indians, the Bada Indians, the Spanish when they came here and established, the British when they established dominance after a certain period of time, the industries established new patterns of life. And what was really interesting about this place is every time a human enterprise entered this place, they actually improved the ecology. And that was something that we've seen that was very rare. They were able to compound resilience. They were able to innovate succession until about 30 years ago, when tourism went off the charts because everything else, the garden city started to die, the industry started to die, business started to die. And when we pointed out that these patterns that we were observing to residents of the city, they said, oh my goodness, you're paying attention. That's exactly what's going on here. And we lost this city 30 years ago, and we don't know how to recover it. And tourism was one of the big industries here. Look at what highways actually became dominant. The automobile became dominant. Well, the one good thing is that universities became dominant, but everything else went off the rails. So we looked at then, how do we re-engage people to reestablish this relationship with a succession and relationship to nature in this place. So that took 2 weeks of meeting with, we met with 18 of the 25 activist groups, and just hearing that idea of potential, instead of just listing problems or fighting a developer, we went from negative to enthusiastic and supportive, that they said, yes, we are willing to engage if we can actually co-create this place again. And that meant that we had to think differently as a developer and as a community. So right now there's the project, and the developer is in a transactional relationship with the community. We're going to give you this neighborhood a school. We'll give this neighborhood an aquatic center. We'll give this neighborhood access to our park if they give us permission to build this project. That is a concession, that's conceding. And so the neighbors live with a development they don't really like, but they get a swimming pool out of it. The developer has to lose some square meters and give money away, so they concede, and nobody's entirely happy, but the project is able to proceed. I think most of us are familiar with that. The new relationship that we're proposing is that we all are responsible for the health of this city and region, this watershed, this life shed. And so here's the developer. The developer is no more important or less important than any other stakeholder. Now that's a situation we typically don't know how to work with in our culture, because we're very hierarchical, very command and control. What we're saying is that we need to trust each other to work towards what is of interest to all of us. And that's what captivated people to begin to say, yes, I'm willing to I'm enthusiastic or supportive of that kind of relationship. And so our role as a designer and as a consultant was to engage people in a co-creative process. And every 4 weeks to 6 weeks, we had a large meeting, a luncheon and an afternoon meeting, sometimes small groups, sometimes medium groups, sometimes large groups, to discuss how and to understand all the different groups that were working on initiatives, because there's always groups who care about the city, but they're in silos of activity. I think we're pretty familiar with this, where I'm raising money for my particular initiative. I don't want to actually share my resources or my secret sauce with anybody else. So I'm going to keep hold and keep my work secret. Meanwhile, somebody else is in their other silo working on very similar things, spending all sorts of resources and raising money that could be actually combined, and efforts and initiatives combined to work together more effectively. So what happened out of this is it took about 10 months, but people began to realize, wait a minute, you're working on the same thing we are. Maybe we ought to work together. So they're developed a mode of trust between people, but it takes that kind of time to develop that kind of trust. And then we were off to the races. One of the professors at the university said, why are you two gringos here? We should be actually leading these meetings. And we said, that's exactly right. You're welcome to it. The Chamber of Commerce executive director, when we first approached him to engage in this kind of discussion, he said, we don't need to talk with you. We know how it works here. We don't need to talk to a couple of guys from the States about this. But 10 months into this project, he called up our client and he said, Ricardo, I don't know what you guys are doing, but count us in. This is the first time this city's been able to dream in 30 years. The mayor did not want to talk to us. In fact, she commanded her staff, her sustainability staff and her planning staff, not to talk with us because she felt that we would destabilize her political ambitions. It took 2 years, but she called up our client. She said, all right, I see what you guys are doing and I'm willing to play. So what happens here is that when you build this kind of coherent point towards a project, is that they can actually learn that all parties have a longer term benefit of working together towards a healthy city. So the activating force was a new real estate project. The opposition is because they think real estate projects are going to destroy the city. But if we can actually work together to benefit towards a healthy city, that's a whole new reconciling point. And the project actually was informed by this. It changed the nature because the city was engaged. It's not that they didn't want development, they just wanted development that was informed and supporting the issues there. And by the way, this estuary, the ED of the Chamber of Commerce gave $4 million to begin the restoration of this estuary. That had nothing to do with the project, but it had everything to do with the health of the city. And that begins to build a field of energy that is much stronger than building in laws or doing a green building checklist or tourist checklist. So the principles behind this are that, and I'm going to emphasize this a number of times, is that your place, your home, is actually a non-threatening initiative. If we talk about religion or politics or race or other issues that are divisive, we can actually create antagonistic relationships. But everybody wants to engage generally in our home, in the health of our home. Humans are social beings. We want to be in relationship with each other, but we don't have a very strong mechanism to do that anymore. It used to be the church. That's not so strong anymore. But again, our home, the health of our place, is one way of being in relationship that's meaningful to people. So it gives meaningful purpose around the potential of that place, a whole living system. The other idea is that this is not just having a conference, because you're going to go away from this conference in 2 weeks, pretty much forget about what was talked about. It has to be regenerated. It's a practice, and that's what regeneration really means. It doesn't happen once, it happens continually, multiple times over the years. It never stops. And that's the difference between a sustainability initiative, which is actually achieving a green building or a green hotel, or a slow food movement in your restaurant. It's a continual practice that invites more and more people to continually regenerate ourselves in our relationships, to develop and evolve. Oscar, is this holding together for a minute? Okay. All right, so what is regeneration? It creates the conditions for life to thrive. And that means as an individual, as a community, and as a place. The second is maybe a little subtle, but it's very important. It achieves dynamic and evolutionary stability. We in the last 20th and 21st century think that we build things out of concrete and steel to get stability. That is not stable. What is stable is the way life continually works in multiple niches. Now, I'm going to use an example from the States, but in our prairies, for instance, prairies adapt under drought, insect infestation, fire, buffalo stampedes, what else? I'm missing a couple of things, but there's all sorts of negative forces that actually affect the prairie, but it keeps coming back after these floods, for instance. There's another one, but it has different niches of competency, if you will, that actually can handle these different environmental pressures. And it's because we have different niches of specialties that fill those gaps, those niches, that we're able to actually move through the different pressures that face us. Today, though, we have lost that dynamic stability. So this is why we're seeing floods and wildfires and tornadoes and hurricanes and heat waves that are actually really destructing our way of life, because we've lost that diversity of natural evolutionary stability. I'm gonna check. Am I making sense here, Oscar? Is that making sense? Okay, good. And regeneration, we are always learning and adapting. Life continually emerges, it evolves. And unless we are paying attention to how it evolves, we are going to go behind. We are now just catching up to that. We're realizing, oh my goodness, I have to pay attention. And that requires humility and self-observation to engage. This is not work that happens just out there. It has to happen in here for us to pay attention. And that's probably the hardest thing we have as Western civilization, is to realize I need to change myself in order to work effectively out there. So we are regenerating what's going on in here, our ability to work together as a group, and our ability to have impact on the places we live. All right, what does that look like? This is actually a way to characterize this. So these are the 4 modern paradigms by Carol Sanford. I particularly love this way of seeing the world. Right now, we are pretty much in an extract value mode on the planet. We pull nutrients from the soil and don't replace them. We pull ore from the earth and don't replace them. So, and we're destroying ecosystems and social systems as a result. So we're saying, oh, we have to stop that. We have to slow down the damage. And this is what the sustainability movement has been pretty much about. I can make buildings more efficient from an energy use. I won't pollute the water as much. And one way to characterize that is arrest disorder or slow down the damage. Well, that's necessary, but still inadequate. So I'm going to do good. Well, that sounds great, except what does do good mean? And do good is actually getting into a lot of trouble, because my version of doing good is likely not the same version as your doing good. So how do we tell what good to do? And I think we can look at the international development community in Africa or Haiti. We helicopter in and we say, you're going to love what we're about. We're going to show you how European lifestyles work or North American lifestyles work, and we're going to give you a better way of life. Well, I think we pretty well know how that's working out. Not so well. So do good is a form of colonialism. We have to be very careful about that. So how do we be careful? And that gets to this last one, and that our real role is to evolve innate capability or evolve inherent potential. Every living entity, let me go to the next slide. Hold on here. Oops. Every living system, sorry for this dense slide. Let's go to the top here. Whether with people or life sheds, which is basically a true watershed, every living entity asks that we approach it individually to reveal and support its unique and inherent potential. I'm sure most of you who have children know that every child is different. And if we don't know that, we can certainly look at our friends. Everybody's different, and they offer a unique perspective in life. And in fact, until we're about 5 years old, we're all geniuses until we have it beaten out of us by our education system and our parents who don't know any better, and we're asked to conform. And that's actually part of the problem. If we can actually allow the person's unique and inherent potential to be expressed, we will have a bunch of geniuses on the planet working together in new ways. So we look at this as not only evolving the innate capability or inherent potential of every individual, but every place has inherent potential. And there is where the power of regenerative tourism lies, is that we have the opportunity to allow each place to express its potential. And that what that does, it makes every place indispensable, non-replaceable. Nobody can actually, no other town can compete when you actually realize the essence of each unique place. That's the secret sauce of regenerative tourism. Don't make things uniform and generic, but express your uniqueness. So let's go through some inherent potential. This little girl likely was going to be an airplane pilot. Inherent potential. Sebastião Sagato's family farm in Brazil. I just happened to, after he got burned out photographing Rwanda and other war zones as a famous international photographer, he went back to his family farm that had been completely destroyed. But 10 years later, it looks like this. Nature wants to recover its inherent potential, its essence, this unique way of being. And all we need to do is pay attention to what it wants to be, not what we think it should be. The Los Plateaux is a famous example in China, an area the size of France. It took 18 months to move from desertification to this, just by paying attention. It took them 29 years, however, to figure out to pay attention to the people that understood how life wanted to work there, instead of imposing a form of colonialism, our idea of the way life wants to work. That never worked, but working with the genius loci of that place. Beijing, after 2 months of COVID, nature recovers pretty quickly. This is very hopeful, folks, if we actually turn our backs on assuming we know the answers and pay attention to what nature wants. This stream in Baltimore, Maryland, was made into a cement stream because it was ripping out earth because of flash floods. But the only reason there were flash floods is we took away the natural systems that slowed it down. But once we actually started controlling the water to allow reestablishment, this bottom picture is what it looks like 3 years later. That's how fast nature recovers. And the inherent potential of cities, whether it's Pittsburgh or Barcelona or Park City or Seattle, each has a way of being and interacting with its place and its social system as well that is unique, that we can actually learn so much from. So moving to another example now, this is Playa Viva, and this is considered the grandfather of regenerative tourism. It's a project we did in 2006. And we were invited by a couple, Sandra Kahn and David Leventhal, to look at this very inexpensive land that had been turned into a monoculture of palm oil production, which collapsed the market and everybody went broke. It sounded like a good idea initially, but it took about 10 years before people to go bankrupt. And the little village was a dying village of about 500 people. And they were going to build an eco resort in this area. And they were going to build on this hill until we discovered, and it took about 15 minutes to discover that this hill, before it had been, the trees are cut down now, is an Aztec pyramid. So there went the idea of building the casitas on the hill. The major transformation went when we went to talk to the village elders. And we took David with us to do that. And we were all blown away by the wisdom and knowledge that this guy and others had of how life wanted to work there. And at that moment, David realized, whoa, this is not me coming into an area and building an eco resort where we hire the local natives to work, to wait tables and clean the casitas and 10 bar. We need to be part of this village. And that was a big move because this village was nothing to write home about. It was a little, blink on the road that was selling coconut candies on the side of the road. So the question that we asked is, how do we create and sustain a visitor economy that tangibly enables resident individuals, businesses, and communities to thrive, flourish, and be healthy in every way? That's the question that regenerative tourism asks. So one of the first things is this was a turtle sanctuary, and these guys were turtle poachers. And again, this is when you have the poachers, you have the sanctuary as a receiving force. How do we allow both of them to work together and thrive instead of saying it's one or the other? Either we're going to eat turtles or we're going to get rid of the poachers. And so the poachers were now turned into the wardens, the natural system wardens. They were paid to protect the turtles, and they know turtles better than anybody. So what better force? And we enrolled the villagers to help begin to restore the health of the estuary that was there. The other interesting thing is that because we couldn't build the casitas on the hill, which is now a pyramid, we actually had to move the casitas to the barrier dune. And we actually quit at that point because he said, we can't build on a barrier dune. The minute you build on it, you create a nick with a foundation, you create a nick point that allows it to erode. And David pointed out to us, he said, Bill, you said you could harmonize, that nature harmonized everything. Why don't you harmonize this? And we thought, well, you're right, we said that. So let's see what we can get to work. So we had a big meeting, and we realized that we could actually turn these casitas into tree houses. That if we actually use the tree houses as these trees, these coconut palms as the foundation, that way we wouldn't have to build these hard foundations of concrete or steel in the soil, and we could actually then build on the barrier dunes. And we built experiments, different lashing techniques to see what worked best. And this is what's happening now, that the tree houses are, and it made it even more unique, because now you're actually kind of swaying in the breeze. When you do have tidal surges, the water goes underneath the tree houses. Even if they are taken away, they're built out of local materials and easily replaced. So that force of working with the activating and restraining forces allowed us to come up with even a better answer than we would have without it. So we want to look for those restraints, those constraints, because they're a source of creativity. And as a result, this eco resort became part of the village, and working on educational programs. The tourists that visit are actually learning how to do biodynamic farming and actually tend the food that they're actually eating. I was in my town here in Boston, and a woman came up to me and said, Bill, I was in this resort where you were involved in. She said, I'm investing in the community. She invested $250 in a little local business, which made her even more attached and in relationship to that place. So there's some amazing things happening. This is a project that builds relationships. It's not just a place to visit and relax. You can relax, and you do relax, but you're actually finding meaning while doing it. The best metric that's going on here, though, is the young adults are moving back. The teenagers are staying. The population is actually growing again. This originally was a 10,000 person Aztec tributary town. It's now a population of 600 people. It went down to like 500. So the trend lines are in the right direction now, because meaning is developed, quality of life is developed, health is developed, better food is developed, better water is developed. And that's what tourists are actually interested in, is vitality. What makes this place vital? That energy is attracting. So we had the activating force as developing a new resort, but we had an unhealthy social and ecological system. And we didn't compromise here. We actually built an idea that we are the village, an integral part of this village of Hulachuca. Here's one kind of fun story, is that the governor of Guerrero, the state that Hulachuca is located in, offered David a new exit off the highway. This was a new business coming into the state. And he said, no, we don't want an exit. We don't want to be special. We are the village. and everybody enters in through this village, which again is not a very exciting place. It's nothing, again, nothing you write home about. Look at where I'm staying. It's actually not so exciting right now. Anyway, you enter right through the village into the resort, and the villagers are integral to the resort. Nobody's wearing name tags with Jesus on them. Basically, we are they're equal to the tourists. Everybody is a stakeholder, and that's a whole different dynamic than most people are used to. By the way, this was built in 2008, and I think you all know what happened in 2008 in terms of the financial collapse. This place has made money even through that. So it's an important distinction to be in integrity with the place you live. So another framework to give you, so we talk about activating and restraining. We talked about the idea of the potential of a living entity, but which entity do you work with? And you work with all of them. So living entities are nested within one another. You have a site, well, you have yourself, you have your family, that's another whole system, then you have your community. And unless I am adding value to my family, the system breaks down. If I am an argumentative or mean person, my family's not going to be healthy. They're going to have not going to have the energy to be a participant in the community. So the system breaks down. So I have to be working on who I am. The family has to be working on how to make them a coherent and meaningful force to engage effectively in the community. And it's no different than the site you're working with. The site is part of the neighborhood. It's part of the life shed and watershed. It has to add value. Each one has to add value to the other. And so part of our mission as a regenerative tourist destination is to understand how your project or your hotel or restaurant or activity can add value to the community, and then understand how the community adds value to the larger system, because you actually have opportunities once you find those value adding opportunities. They add value to you. So it's basically a nested system that has a mutual exchange of value. And of course, you receive value from those larger systems. So it's to our benefit to be very conscious of these nested relationships and how we can exchange value. Hold on. So I'm going to give you an example about this if I can move the computer ahead. Yes. So this is not exactly a tourist example, but it is in a tourist town. This is the Brattleboro Food Co-op. It's a project we did over 20 years ago now. And it's a grocery store. It's a cooperative grocery store. And we were asked to do a LEED Gold, that's a rating system, a green building rating system, that some of you may be familiar with, a LEED Gold grocery store. And we asked them, do you want LEED or do you want sustainability? And they said, well, we want both, which is actually a really good answer. So the tourism aspect of this is that people come from all over because this is a farming area, the slow food movement actually began, this is one of the starting points of that, the localization movement. They have a parade every year called the March of the Heifers. There aren't many towns that have a parade about cows. So, but it attracts lots of people. It's a food-oriented, back to the land-oriented place. And that allowed us to actually tune into them and say, well, you want a sustainable grocery store, the average bite of food in the United States travels 3,600 miles. It used to travel 10 miles, 20 miles. So we basically looked at this grocery store is not a sustainable grocery store unless we can have local food. If there's a truckers strike, they're out of business in 3 days. If a big grocery store chain comes into town, they're probably out of business in a year. And the one thing a truckers strike and a grocery store chain can't compete with is local food. So here's the grocery store, but we looked out at the system and said, well, where do we get food? And here are the old farms that have been abandoned. And there was only 1 or 2 farms left out of 50 or 60 in this area that had been there 50 years ago. So we thought, well, what happens if we bring back the farms? Well, the food, all the soil has been degraded because of bad farming practices. The best soil was in downtown Brattleboro. So this grocery store, the brief for this grocery store was to plant backyard gardens. Most towns fed themselves during World War II in what we called victory gardens here. So you can actually do a lot of food production in backyard gardens. So the first thing is the best soil was here in downtown Brattleboro. So this grocery store was programmed to become an agriculture and soil extension service, a government advisory group to teach people how to grow their own food again in their backyards. A cannery, so they could can their own food. A daycare center to take care of their kids while they were doing that. A credit union to actually reestablish and loan money at lower interest rates to reestablish farms again, and a forestry service to begin to reestablish the soil health of this place. And by the way, a grocery store. So it was all of these things that came out of thinking about the system that we're part of. And the reason I share this example with you is that any of your businesses, if you think about those multiple nested systems and the relationships and the value that can be reciprocally added, you can find all sorts of new opportunities. So that's the main point about that, is that, but it was so strange. I'll give you kind of a funny story, is that we gave this presentation to the board. The executive committee was very excited about this, but the board had no clue. And we dumped this on them. We basically presented this in a rushed meeting. And one of the board members said, all we wanted was a grocery store. What is this stuff? So we were fired that night. And one of the things is that we wrote a long report, and we got a call a year later from the board president saying, Bill, we want to apologize. This is the best thing that's ever happened to us. We have we've written a 100-year ends policy, which basically is incorporating all this thinking. And the town and the grocery store, the co-op are working to establish these kind of regeneration of the soil and the farming system in the city. The building itself wasn't as important as we thought. It was an acupuncture point, but it wasn't the point. So that's what regeneration can do. We can actually exhibit massive change. And this is why regenerative tourism is so important. It's just not about your business. It's about all the related businesses that can actually be lifted up if you work together as an ongoing practice. All right, let me see if I can move ahead here. Oh, I forgot about this. And they even went further than this. So not only were they looking at the immediate area of Brattleboro, but they looked at the whole area of New England, and they began to work with other cooperative grocery stores to teach them how to think the same way. And this is why this kind of work offers hope for me, because massive change can come out of this kind of thinking if you think beyond the project itself. Think about the value-adding relationship to the systems you are part of and have influence over. So here's another principle, is that you have to work in place. La Cerdanya is a big valley, but you can't work on that as a whole system. Every town needs to work, every little region in this. I've never been there, so I can't really say this with definitive clarity, but I would venture to say is that every town is unique, and you want to understand its uniqueness and also understand that you're all in this work together. So there's uniqueness and compatibility and coherency that needs to be explored. But Elinor Ostrom, who won the Nobel Prize in 2009 for her work on common pool resource, said we can't save the planet. The tragedy of the commons that Garrett Hardin wrote about in the 1960s, basically saying that we will just keep abusing the air and the oceans because nobody's responsible for it. But if we actually focus on the places we live, we get the feedback from that place. We know when we're screwing things up. We know when things are going downhill, and we respond accordingly. So our premise is that we can heal the earth place by place. And we only need to get 3.5% of the places on the earth to do this, and the rest of the world will be transformed. So if La Cerdanya can do this in your villages, place by place, you can be an amazing example for the rest of the planet. So a couple final thoughts. I think Anna Pollock might have used these quotes exactly, but I think they're beautiful, from Simone Weil. Place is a doorway into caring. Love of place unleashes the personal and political will needed to make profound change. It can also unite people across all the different kind of conservative and liberal spectra, because place is what we all share. It is the common that allows all people to call themselves a community. So I want to point out just a couple final ideas that achieving a healthy system is not a one-time event. I know I said that before. It's a process of continually regenerating or evolving ourselves and our relationships around common purpose. So identify that common purpose, that unique nature of each place you live, and that will begin to cohere people towards meaningful change. I'm not going to go over these different principles, but this is a summary of the principles that I've outlined in the talk. And maybe you can take a screenshot, but these are resources to think differently. And I will share them with Oscar and Alba and Erica. So I started out with, what is our role? The core purpose of humans and businesses is to serve the healthy evolution of life. It isn't to extract stuff. The role of tourism and all the actors within it must act accordingly. And here's some definitions now that a researcher out of Australia, boy, I'm drawing a blank on Loretta's name. Loretta Bellato, sorry, Loretta, you hear this, is that we have different roles now in tourism. I mean, we can go over here to the right side, and the fragmented view is, well, we have hotels and restaurants and services, and everybody's kind of fighting for their own business. And maybe we cooperate and integrate in terms of mutually beneficial back and forth and sharing of customers and what have you. But if we actually shift the nature of our role to who we are, how we care, and the place we care about, we then have different categories. So there's certainly hosting. That's a whole idea of being in relationship, because a host is somebody who is in relationship to their guests. Guesting is a process. Not just you are a guest. You're a guest that actually has an opportunity to serve and actually learn in this place. The community happens because everybody in a community needs to be conscious of a responsible role to the guests and to the hosts. How we offer, how we treat each other, how we treat not only our guests, but how we treat each other. And there are those who are stewarding this place. The farmers are stewarding the soil. The water utilities, stewarding water. The electrical company is stewarding carbon. And how do we actually become stewards that are responsible for our role in the environment? And if you actually get these are three stakeholder type roles. The place is also a stakeholder, and all of these roles are serving the place, adding value to each other and the whole system. That begins to shift how we think about ourselves and our role. And I want to remind you, let's see, I think that's it. Yep. I want to remind us is that we have to practice this internally to be effective externally. I love what Katia Laszlo, she's from Mexico, talks about sustainability. Sustainability is an inside job. It has to happen here. And therefore it can happen effectively in the group. Because if I'm a jerk, I admittedly am a jerk occasionally, that if I'm a jerk, the group's not going to be very effective. So I have to stop being a jerk. And I want the group to actually begin to help me, remind me of that, so we can be more effective as a group, because we've got a lot of work to do to affect the health of the systems that we have. And tourism can be an opportunity to work together in a new way. And I think that's done. I think it's the top of the hour, so I'm finished. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bill. That was very inspiring. I don't know if you guys have questions. Teniu preguntes? Vale. Doncs... Hello. Thank you very much, Bill. I'm gonna ask you a question for my father, because I was talking to my father about this the other day and I didn't know what to answer, and maybe you could answer him. We were talking about this project in China, the Regenerative project in China.
Of the Los Plateau?
That one. And when I talked to him about that, because there was a documentary on Netflix talking about it and we were really excited about it. And my dad was saying that that was an investment, and it means public sector investment that cannot be done privately. And I would like to know your opinion about if this is possible to be done from a private perspective, in a personal place.
Yep, great. That's a great question. And yes, the Los Plateau, I mean, China obviously is a different government too. Generally, so we are hired often by private developers who are private investors. There's no government involved. And remember that I'm going to share my screen again because I think it's worth talking about. This is really important. I'm going to go back to that image of, sorry to do this to you. So typically, so this is the typical arena that we work in, and there's no money being provided. The developer has their budget set for their project. They are often spending money on lawyers and public relations to get approval for their project. We have shifted that around, and we're not the only ones doing this, where we say, don't spend your money on lawyers, no offense to lawyers or public relations firms, but engage the community in something meaningful, not just fighting the project, but actually saying, what are we in it together? And what purpose, what potential can we work on together that's meaningful to people? And everybody wants quality of life. I can assure you, nobody does, everybody wants quality of life. What is missing, though, is an organizational ability to help people work on that. Government typically doesn't do that. Now, in the Los Plateaus case, it did, but it took 29 years for the government to figure out what to do. So that was mostly a waste of time. If you could actually motivate all the people that are already working on issues, and I can guarantee you, every city and community has people that are working on the health of the water or climate change or habitat connectivity or soil health, you name it, or gender equity or social justice. Am I right about, is that a fair statement? Oscar, I'll just check with you. Okay, so the problem is that we all work in silos. And what's wonderful about this way of working is that we invite people to get out of their silos in service of something larger. They already are raising money. They already are energized and working. And all we're doing is we're making them much more effective by getting them to work together. So we're teaching them how to work together effectively. So the money that this developer was spending on lawyers is now being spent for a lunch every 4 weeks or 6 weeks to get people in the same room together. That's really inexpensive. And we find out that they begin to take off. These stakeholders then begin to share resources and share energy. Now, what's interesting is that what we find our role to be is to teach people how to run effective meetings. Most people do not know how to run effective meetings. I'm sure you've all been to meetings that are boring or non-productive. And we teach towns and cities how to be very effective. And once people see the effective results coming out of these meetings, more people join, just like the executive director did at the Chamber of Commerce in Viña del Mar, or the mayor did. He said, oh, this is working. This isn't a waste of time. So it takes time to build that momentum. But once you have it going, it takes off. So this is why when you hire a sustainability consultant, do not hire them for a weekend. There's no such thing as a change management weekend. It takes time to practice this. So life is a practice. Sustainability is a practice. Learning a language is a practice. Exercise is a practice. Why do we think sustainability will happen because we give a checklist or we have a couple of meetings? It will not. So this is simply about getting people who are already funded or already motivated to work together in a practice in an effective way. Is that holding together?
Yes, perfectly. That was really clear. Thank you. I don't know if there's another question. Mark? Oh, that's going to be the last question then.
Okay. ¿Está bien?
Oh, no, this one.
Oh.
This question is from a developer perspective. When do you want to create an eco-resort or a regenerative project? It comes the fear of the expenses versus the traditional project. Is that a fake? Is it a fake myth, or is it real that at short term? One second. No t'acabo d'entendre la pregunta final. When do you want to develop a tourist project, regenerative project, versus a traditional project? It's more money at short term to do an investment on a regenerative project than a traditional project, or is that just a fake myth?
I can tell you it is less money, first cost, and it is less money, operational cost. And you will find that because you are unique, you will attract markets that you never would have attracted before. I work with 2 real estate development firms in the United States who discovered this on their own. We have, and our work too, we find out in populated areas where you have lots of control through permitting and site plan approval, we save 18 months of site approval time by working this way. 18 months on an average. And we have much better retention of real estate of apartment dwellers. We have lower maintenance costs because people care in a new way. So the private developers we work with, and these are well-meaning people, they say that we laugh all the way to the bank, and they wonder why other developers don't work this way, because it is so much more effective. to work in collaboration rather than in opposition. Does that answer the question? I'm not sure I answered the question. Okay.
Yes, Mark says that, yes.
Okay.
Then I guess the conference goes up to here. Then we're really grateful to have you here, and this was really inspiring. And thank you so
Oscar.
much, Bill.
Oscar, Alva, Erica, thank you, everybody. Nice to see you in the distance.
Well, everyone is applauding you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Enjoy the conference.
Thank you. Bye.
Dios.